Алло, здравствуйте, привет всем, Бог свима, Хясас. How are y'all doing? There we go. Perfect. So welcome guys, welcome to the penultimate stream. This stream will be covering the next 3 letters of Istomin Bukvár. We only have 6 more letters to go. So we'll cover 3 this time, and then next week, because it's Sunday, right? It's Sunday today. We'll cover the next, or the last 3 letters next week. Probably on Sunday, maybe Monday, something like that. Привет! So in today's stream, we're going to be covering U, bukva U. So this letter, the next one, bukva Ya, bukva Ksi. And then last time, or next time, we're going to be covering Psa, Fita, and Ižica. So all of these are Greek letters. They will always put at the end of the Cyrillic alphabet. And this time is going to be U, Ya, and Ksi. But before we start, same thing as always, I want to say a quick thank you to Van Dog for helping me out with the translations. Thank you so much for giving me some examples. Also want to thank people from the Discord server for helping me out with some translations. Thank you very much for helping me out. Also want to say that I'm not a theologian. I'm not a linguist. I'm just a guy who likes languages. So if I make any mistakes, please correct me. Feel free to just write a comment or in the chat right now. Let me know. There's a few things I didn't understand myself, so if you have any idea, maybe you know what's being said or what the writer meant, feel free to correct me anytime. So just before we begin, please grab something to drink and hold on, because this is going to be like an hour of Old East Slavic, Old Church Slavonic, and modern Russian. So let's go. The first letter that we're going to cover is bukva U, so the letter U. And this letter comes to us directly from Old Church Slavonic. So in Old Church Slavonic, you had a glyph, which looked like this, in Cyrillic that is, not in Glagolitic, and it represented the sound U. And this sound didn't change. So throughout history in Old Church Slavonic, you had Old East Slavic and a modern Russian. All of these sounds, it basically represented the sound U. And in modern Russian, the letter still bears the same name, so it didn't change. Interestingly, just like some letters that we covered before, U actually doesn't hold any numerical value. So it doesn't represent any number, right? So in the Old Cyrillic alphabet, most letters, not all of them, this is an example of one of the letters that actually didn't represent a numerical value. Please leave a like on the others. So, as you guys can see, this letter consists of 2 different parts. And in linguistics, we call this a ligature, right? Or it's consisted of 2 distinct parts. We can see this part right here, which looks like an I, which comes directly from Greek. In Slavic, this letter was called I, meaning and the second part, which is an O. And this letter in Old Church Slavonic was called on, meaning he. So it's basically a ligature consisting of these 2 parts, E plus O, right? And if you guys attended the previous streams, you might know that when a ligature is put in place, like when you have a ligature, basically the 2 sounds of the ligature are combined. So you would expect this letter to sound something like Io, right? But the problem is that early Slavic, Old Church Slavonic, and early Old East Slavic actually didn't have the yo sound. It didn't exist. It only started appearing somewhere in the 13th, 14th century. So if someone would write I-O, the other person would automatically understand that this couldn't represent the yo sound, but it would represent the U sound. That is because writing a digraph like I plus U, which we can find, just a sec. Bukva U is kind of troublesome, right? You don't want to write I plus U, right? You don't want to write it like that. You just want to write it like I plus O. And everyone automatically knew that it would represent a U sound instead of a yo sound. Interesting thing is that in certain situations, this letter actually didn't represent a U sound, but U as well. Specifically after ch, sh, zh, c, dz, sht, and zhd. But its pronunciation and especially its orthographic rules were extremely inconsistent because, as we all know, Old Slavonic is a beautiful mess. It's absolutely amazing, but it's a mess. So sometimes it did represent that sound, but most of the times it wasn't written. This is actually not the only form that you can encounter. So when you study specifically Old East Slavic documents from the 12th century, you can actually encounter a different form of this letter. And that form basically flips the O and I. So the first part of the ligature would be O, and the second part would be E, right? So it would look something like this. O with a line. Oh. It would look something like this, which obviously is the flipped version of that one. I tried finding some information about it. I actually did from a book from like 1980. But Wikipedia also has, Wikipedia basically has a small like paragraph on it, and it basically claims that that was the original form, but there's sadly no evidence of this. Most probable explanation would be that they just like flip letters, just like the xi, which was flipped from Greek, just like that, this letter was also flipped. When we think about this, we can actually think of another theory. It doesn't hold any merit because it's not proven, but it's an interesting concept, right? So in Greek, during this period, or during the 9th century, when the Glagolitic alphabet was created, Greek actually had a digraph which looked like this. And this represented the U sound. And this U, which was the sound that was represented by Ižica, right? U, which is present in German and in French, was written like this, or one of the ways it was written like this. And when you think about it, U and U are not that far apart, right? They don't sound that different. So when you see this form, you kind of think like maybe this represented U and then switched to U. But it's just a theory, right? I just started thinking about this. So it might be an interesting theory to think about. Sergey, originally yo. Exactly, basically. Purio. So there's different theories regarding the origin of this letter. The actual origin is unknown. I couldn't find anything about it. Well, there's several different claims, but we don't quite know where it comes from. So we can see the different forms, just like with every letter. So we have U, different forms. This is the thumbnail, right, for the stream. Then you have the different shorthand versions. Some of them were extremely difficult to read, and then you have the Polish one. And there's no Greek version because Greek didn't have this letter. And let's move on to the words. So the first one is junosha. Junosha, and you can see the feminine version, junotka. And this, well, junosha is still used in Russian, but junotka isn't. It's extremely archaic, and it means youngster or adolescent, right? Someone who is not an adult yet. And this comes to us from Old East Slavic, junosha. Interestingly enough, there was also a different orthographical standard, so you could encounter something like junosha with an on sound, even though, you know, there was no nasal there, but it's interesting to find. And it had two different meanings, adolescent, just like in modern Russian, and slave, rab. So it had two different meanings. It could mean someone who was not an adult yet, and the second one was a slave. And this is actually a borrowing from Old Slavonic, junosha, junota, and junoshica, and it meant youngster. And this comes from Proto-Slavic, juna, meaning young, and it can still be found in modern Russian. So modern Russian, or juna, turned into juni in modern Russian, which means young one, right? It developed differently in South Slavic. So in Croatian, you have junak or junak, depending on the region you're from, which basically means a hero. So it developed differently in different Slavic languages. And then you have this picture, or these three drawings, basically. Yuzi. Yuzi is kind of It's used in modern Russian, but it's kind of seen as a high style of the language, right? It's kind of seen as formal, and it has two different meanings. Actually, three. The first one would be a skid in English, which is a shoe or a clog, basically made of iron, which is attached to a chain, and you can place that underneath your car or a wagon to prevent it from turning when you descend down a hill. And the second meaning would be something like a hook attached to a chain. And the third one would just be chains. And this in modern Russian would be okovy. So chains, specifically fetters. And fetters in English are these chains that were put around the feet of criminals and slaves, very specific kind of chains. So in modern Russian, this would mean something like skid or shackles, right? Which comes to us from Old East Slavic, yuza, which is the singular form, which comes from yonza, and Old Church Slavonic onza, meaning fetters, chains, or shackles. And then the last one, we have three different words. Yunona boginya poganskaya, right? So Yunona is the name Juno, which is a pagan goddess, which is the queen of the gods in Roman mythology. And the interesting thing is that when you look at boginya means queen, right? Or goddess, actually. We can see that this name isn't shortened. So unlike Bog, God, right? In these texts, let's see if we can find them. Божью волю, so God's will, right? You can see titla right here, which is basically the shortened form, which indicates some kind of special meaning. In this case, it indicates His holiness, right? So holy words which you expected to treat in a certain way, in a positive way, were basically revered, right? So they were indicated, or treated in a special way. So in this case, this is a pagan goddess, and a pagan goddess didn't receive the respect from these old East Slavic peoples because they were seen as pagans. So the name goddess, because it's not God, wasn't shortened. So no titlo was used. Paganskaya, meaning pagan, right? I tried looking up the etymology of the name Yunona. Basically, it comes from Iuno, but the etymology is disputed, and it comes from Proto-Indo-European, and my Proto-Indo-European is terrible, but it sounds something like du hon, meaning having heavenly authority, or something like hu meaning the young goddess. And boginya itself comes from bogyny, which is basically bog, which is God, plus a suffix, right, indicating feminine properties. Just a sec. So now that we covered that one, let's move on to the text. There we go. Юності труди, лепо єсть давати. So, юності труди. Юность is young, right? Youth. So, труди basically means labor. Or when you try to do something. Basically, in this case, in the sentence, it probably means labor. Лепо. This is not used in modern Russian anymore. But liepa in Old Church Slavonic and in Church Slavonic, so Russian Church Slavonic, has a lot of different meanings. One of them would be хорошо, which is like good, полезно, meaning useful, красиво, which means beautiful. So in this case, it means beautiful to be. So this is the first person form. Есть is, or the third person. I mean, is давати, to give. So basically, this says something like, Лепо есть давати юності труди. So when you're a young person, it's good to give labor. So it's good to work, to do something. This is basically a subject that we can encounter it all throughout this document, right? In the previous streams, we covered this as well. Work is seen as something that deserves respect, honor, and all of the good in the world, right? And why should we work or give labor when we're young? Well, that's because в старости будет всяк упочивати. So в старости, so in old age, будет, will be, всяк, everyone, упочивати, will rest or will sleep. So опочивать, in modern Russian, it's kind of archaic, but in Old Slavic it also meant to sleep, spать. So in this case it means to rest. So you have to work when you're young, and when you're old you will sleep or you will rest, right? Причина ю в слог и в починстве служит. This is a word that we covered in the last stream. So this means at the front, you in syllable. So you at the front of a syllable, and in the end, it serves. So basically, you at the front of a syllable, and at the end, it also has a function. So depending on the position of the placement of you, the function of the letter changes. Moving on, юный быв праздней во веки потушит. Потушит. So basically, юный, young one, быв, past tense of быть, who was, праздный. So in this case, it means something like idle or useless. So a young person who was useless. Во веки, so in centuries. It means forever in this case. In centuries, потужит, so will grieve. So a young person who was idle or useless will grieve forever. Kind of dark. Что ли потребно, он пренебрегает. So, что, what? Question marker, needed, he neglects or will ignore, right? Because someone who's idle will ignore or neglect everything that's necessary. And in this case, it could be kind of metaphysical, it could be more theological, as in everything that's needed to construct or build a useful life will be neglected and will be destroyed if someone doesn't do what they're supposed to do, right? That's the meaning that I gather from this. Добра бити в нем никто уповает. So добра, good. Бити, to be, в нем, in him, никто, no one, уповает. So no one hopes for. Which basically means something like good being in him. So the good that is in someone, никто, no one will hope for. This is kind of difficult, right? Because you would think that добра бити в нем. So when the good is in you, you would aim for that. But in this case, one could understand this as it's good that you're doing good, and you should strive for like living the best life that you can. But your sole goal shouldn't be that, right? Because it's a sin, or it's not good if your goal is only to get into heaven. You should do something useful. You should help people, but not only think about heaven, not only think about the future. So something like that. O, which is the beautiful interjection, omega, right? The broad omega. Istomin's primer dropping cold hard facts on life. O юный старых. So, O young one, старых людей ты держися. So this would be hold on to old people. Старых, old people, люди, people, ты, you, держися, hold on. So stick close to old people. This is actually a sentence we've seen before in one of the other letters. В забавах везде с ними быты тщися. So in fairs or fun everywhere, with them, to be, stick with them or try to be with them. So in fairs and fun, so during fun times everywhere, try to be with them. Probably because they can teach you a lot of different things, right? It's good to be surrounded by your own peers, but sometimes it's good to be surrounded by older people because they can teach you things that they learned in their lives. And the last two sentences. В починстве быв юн, впреди заседает. So in починстве, so in the beginning, быв юн, you were young. Впреди, so this is at the front, заседает. So when you were young, in the beginning, you were sitting at the front. So I don't think this is the literal meaning of this. I think this is again kind of, it's not a literal thing, because when you're young, you're just starting off with life, right? You're in the first phases of your life. So сидеть впереди, meaning you're sitting at the front because your life just started. So I think this is a reference to that, just beginning your life. Притчи, словеса, вещь и время знает. You were born at a very young age. Basically. So притчи, словеса, вещь и время знает. So this would be fables or stories. Словеса, so this is not used in modern Russian, but словеса basically means slova, so texts or words, even something like stories from the Bible, right? Словеса, вещь, thing or essence, and time knows. So basically fables and holy words, thing or essence in time knows. So maybe that you will learn these things, or the good person knows the stories. Could probably refer to something from the Bible as well, although I couldn't find any references. So basically, if we read through this, again, this is just like the other texts. This talks about life, right? This was written for the son of Peter the Great, and basically Istomin tried to create something which the son could read and learn something from, right? Because life is tough. So if we have some kind of guidelines, and they would use biblical aspects, right? Biblical guidelines, you could get through life. And a lot of these sentences actually still make a lot of sense. It's incredibly well written. So, юності труди лепо єсть давати, в старості будет всяк упочивати. Причина юг в слог и в починстве служит, юны быв праздней во веки потужит. Что ли потребно он пренебрегает, добра быты в нем никто уповает. О юны старых людей ты держися, в забавах везде с ними быты тщися. В починстве быв юн, впереди заседает, притчи, словеса, вещь и время знает. Sergei, yeah. Spoiler, son died. You're right. Exactly. He did. So moving on to the next letter. This is a very interesting letter. Bukva ya. Let's examine it first so we can see this form. A lot of different forms. This is a soldier. A lot of different drawings. And the text. So, bukva ya. The origin of this letter is kind of interesting because Old Church Slavonic, or the glagolitic version of Old Church Slavonic, had one symbol which represented two different sounds. This is what we covered last stream. So in glagolitic, you had one symbol which looked like a triangle, which represented bukva yat, right, and the letter ya. But as glagolitic developed and eventually gave rise to Cyrillic, two different letters were created. One of these letters was bukva ya, and the original name was ya as well. And eventually this form was abolished when Peter the Great came to power. So in 1708, one of his reforms, the first reform actually, he banished, right, to the shadow realm this letter. This letter disappeared. So it was basically not part of the glagolitic script because it had one glyph, and then eventually it became part of the Cyrillic script, right? The origin, as in when this letter became accepted, is kind of disputed simply because some writers claim that this was actually not part of the original Cyrillic alphabet. Bukvaya, new Blackpink hit. Boombaya. So, but yeah, so we actually don't know if this was part of the original Cyrillic script, but some writers claim it wasn't. And if we examine the different forms, we can actually see something very interesting. And that is that we can see this form and this form right here. And for those who studied Ultra-Slavonic or Old East Slavic, they will know that these two are not the same letter at all. They're completely different letters and they have nothing to do with each other. If you look right here, U, all of these letters represent the sound U, right? If you go even back, Yat, all of these letters are Bukvayat. All of them represent the sound A. But this sound and this sound have, or these two letters have nothing to do with each other in Ultra-Slavonic. So why is it there? Well, this letter in modern Russian, even though modern Russian doesn't use it, is called Yus Mali, right? The little Yus. And in Ultra-Slavonic, it had a different name. And in Ultra-Slavonic, the name was Yasa, because it represented a nasal A sound. And this sound disappeared in Russian somewhere in the early 10th century, probably, and was kept in different Slavic languages. For example, in Polish. In Polish, this letter still exists, obviously, in a Latin form. Until quite recently, there were certain villages in Bulgaria where this sound was still used, although it developed, but it was still, or it still represented a nasal sound. There's evidence from the 1960s. There was a Russian linguist who basically traveled to some rural Bulgarian villages, and he encountered some people who were still using nasal sounds. And the local population, the newer generation, actually thought that these people were not speaking Bulgarian because they didn't know these nasal sounds, right? Isn't Polish the only one? I'm not sure. I don't think there are any more. I know that there are certain Bulgarian dialects which still kind of use a nasal, even though it's usually a M sound, like M. It might be. It might be. So, basically, why is this letter right here, right? That's because this letter, this A sound, developed in Old East Slavic, and in Old East Slavic, it eventually turned into Ya. So A turned into Ya. And now you can see why it's here. That's because from like the 12th century, something like that, it actually becomes a form of this letter. So you had two different letters which represented two different sounds in Ultra-Slavonic, namely Ya and A. They merged. So because they were both pronounced, so Ya stayed Ya, and A became Ya. So these two actually became two different forms of the same letter, even though the origin was completely different. It eventually developed, and it was standardized throughout these centuries, and eventually this became the capital letter. So if it was the first letter of a word, it became this, or this was the form that was used. And if it was in the middle of the word or at the end, this was the form that was used. And that's the standard that Church or modern Russian Church Slavonic still uses. So in modern Church Slavonic, you can still find both the different forms. So that's why it's right here. You see the different letters. This is the Polish one, Ya, and the different shorthand versions. So let's move on to the drawings. So the first one, Yabloko, or Yabloko, means apple. Didn't change. So in modern Russian, Yabloko is the same thing, although the O's are reduced. And interestingly, a viewer of mine commented, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, basically commented that on the first stream, that Russian started reducing vowels all the way back in the 15th century. So I started looking into this, and he was totally right. So it turns out that we actually have evidence even from the 14th century that Russian was reducing vowels. So there's a high chance that people would actually read this as yablaka with a sounds instead of yabloko, which is what I used. In modern Church Slavonic and in Old Church Slavonic, these were not reduced. And modern Church Slavonic also doesn't reduce them. So that's the pronunciation that I'll be using. Yabloko. So this comes from yabloko, which means apple in Old East Slavic, also ball, but it also had a different meaning, which was power. And you might say, like, why power, right? Because it's an apple. Well, that's because of the globus cruciger. And you guys might be familiar with this. That's this royal orb with a cross. Basically, emperors would carry these. The emperor of the Holy Roman Empire has one of these. I know we use them in the Catholic Church. I don't know if the Orthodox Church uses it as well, but it's quite a common object. It represents power and imperial authority. And this comes from Proto-Slavic ablako, which means apple, right? The holy hand grenade, exactly. That's exactly what it is. The next word would be yablany. So this is apple tree. Modern Russian doesn't use this form anymore. Modern Russian uses yablanya with ya at the end, but yablany still exists in Russian, but it's the genitive plural, right? So in Old East Slavic, this would be yablona, which comes from Proto-Slavic ablona, meaning apple tree. Moving on to the next one, yagode, which means berries. Same thing as in modern Russian. Comes from Proto-Slavic agoda, which means berry. Interestingly, berry actually developed differently in different regions. So, for example, in Croatian, we have jagoda, but it doesn't mean berry. It means strawberry. So, specific type of berry. Although in most Slavic languages, it will just mean berry. Oh, привет. So, in Old Church Slavonic, meaning changed as well. So, in Old Church Slavonic, it didn't mean berry. It meant fruit. Agoda meant fruit. So, any type of fruit was agoda. And moving on to the next one, yastreb. This is a hawk or a bird of prey, right? So, in modern Russian, didn't change. Yastreb, which comes from Proto-Slavic astraba, which means hawk, a bird of prey. Quite a big bird. To the next one, bobica. Exactly, yeah, bobica. So for berry we have bobica, but we call jagoda as a specific type, right? Interesting. So jajco. So this is egg, which comes from Old East Slavic jajce, which comes from Proto-Slavic ajece. Which is actually a combination of two different words. Aje, meaning egg, plus itze, which is a diminutive suffix. So basically, jitzo means a little egg. But eventually, due to a semantic shift, it switched to egg. Right? And now we have this letter. So I'm going to zoom in. Here we go. This letter, or this word, I should say. And the origin of this word is really interesting. So this is not a Slavic word, but it says jahund, which comes originally from ancient Greek hyakinthos, which had a lot of different meanings. One of this was like a different kind of plant and a certain type of blue. And certain gemstones. So a lot of different meanings. And this was borrowed into Latin, hyacinthus, or hyacinthus, which is an iris, like the plant, or sapphire. This was borrowed into Middle High German, jachant, which was borrowed into Polish, jachant, meaning unspecified gemstone, or the color blue. And that was borrowed in the 16th century into Russian, jahont, meaning gemstone, but usually a ruby or a sapphire. So modern Russian still uses this sometimes. It's seen as a very formal word. So for something like ruby, modern Russian would prefer rubin or rubin, and sapphire would be something like sapphire. But this is originally comes from ancient Greek. English, apple meant any fruit or vegetable. Perfect. That's exactly it. That's exactly what happened in Old Church Slavonic. Moving on. So guys, I told you that if a word starts with this form of ya, with the sound ya, it will be written like this, right? So we can say яйцо, яблонь, яблоко. But this word also starts with ya, but isn't written like that. Does anyone know why that's the case? Why is this word not written with this form? Can someone guess? Or does someone know? Andro, typo. See, dude, actually, that would make perfect sense, right? I mean, this thing is filled with typos anyway. But no, actual Polish facts required etymological spelling. So, well, this is not etymological spelling, even though, well, it is etymological spelling, but the reason is kind of different, and that's because in Slavic you had the word jazyka, which meant tongue or language. But in Old East Slavic, a different meaning was added to that list, and that was population or people. But the writers actually wanted to indicate that that was not one of the official meanings, one of the original meanings, so they decided to spell it in a different way. So when it meant tongue or language, the etymological spelling was used. But when it was written, when it meant population or people, this ya was used. So basically, to distinguish or use orthography to distinguish the meaning of words, they opted to use this one. This was the case and still is the case in modern Church Slavonic. So that's one of the only exceptions when this letter is used as the first letter. So just like you can see right here, in modern Church Slavonic, if they use this form, it means language or tongue. And if they use this form as the first letter, it means narod, people or population. Great. Good job, guys. That makes sense. So in this case, it meant tongue or language. We're going to complicate things a little bit later, but let's keep this for now. Let's move on to the next one, yazd or yaz. We can see this form, right? Yeah. And it meant eyed, which is a freshwater fish found in large rivers and ponds, specifically in the northern parts of Europe and Asia, so not in the southern parts. I don't know what that is. I will look it up later. Thank you. So basically, this comes from Proto-Slavic aze, which originally, interestingly enough, meant ram. So the animal, right, a billy goat, it meant ram. And then meaning switched, or a semantic shift happened, and it started meaning this eyed fish. And on this one, I actually forgot about this one right until the end. Jaszczurka. So in English, this is eremia, which comes from Greek, which is this kind of small lizard, a wall lizard native to Asia and southeastern Europe. They live in like steppes and deserts. Also meant yashchur in modern Russian means foot and mouth disease, which obviously has nothing to do with this animal, but it's a highly contagious viral disease of animals with hooves. Basically, in modern Russian, this form isn't used anymore. They have yasher, which means it's like this big reptile, right? It can also mean dinosaur, but basically any big reptile. And yasheritsa means lizard. So this animal in modern Russian would be yasheritsa. Tiktalik, I don't know what that is. And then this comes from Proto-Slavic ashchera, which means lizard or salamander. So just to reiterate, there's two different forms in this period of the letter ya. This is the capital form or the initial form, and this is when it's medial or final. And originally this was the sound ya and this was a, right? Just like in Polish. Let's move on to the text. Кто отзовется я в каковом деле? Who answers отзовется я в каковом деле? So, to understand this, we have to take a look at Old Church Slavonic and Modern Church Slavonic. So this letter, ya, doesn't mean I. It doesn't mean the name of this letter. It means them. And that is because in Old Church Slavonic, the accusative plural of они, of them, or they, was yen. And yen eventually was absorbed into Church Slavonic and it became this form. So this can mean a lot of different things. One of them was ya, so I. A different meaning was the name of the letter, but in this case, it means them. So who answers them in whichever, каковом, so this is not used in modern Russian. Каковой is kind of an archaic way of saying какой, which or what, деле, so matter or case. So who answers them in whichever matter or case. This will make sense if we examine the second sentence. И письмя зрев я познают все смеле. So this would be, and look at, zriev, so this is the archaic Russian word for look, or to look at, to examine something. Письмя, letter ya, so in this case it does mean the letter ya. Oh, James, привет. So, из письма зрев я познают, so in this case this would be learn all the brave ones. So these sentences, these two sentences, probably mean something along the lines of whoever knows where to use these different forms, because there's two of them, right? He is the brave one. He's the smart one. И письмя зрев я познают все смеле. So we'll learn all the good, the brave ones. Let's see. What's the first fish to walk on? Was it... So was un, and use большой was on. That was the different one. So that is, so this was un, and looks like that creature from The Incredibles, if you guys watched it like 20 years ago. So the next sentence, or here we go, exactly. Язык уд в слово создан носите. So in this case, язык or язык. So this one, right? So this is the tongue or language, but in this case it's tongue. Ud, which is an archaic word for limb or organ in all East Slavic. So the tongue is an organ. Slovo sozdan is created in the word, flogos, right? And in the word, nosit. So the tongue is an organ created to carry knowledge. And here we go. Языцы разные в странах говорите. So I told you guys that if you have this form of the word, it means people or народ, right? So it means people or population. This writer, Istomin, doesn't use it like that. And this is because during this period, Old Church Slavonic or Church Slavonic, it was decently standardized, but not completely. So in this case, it doesn't mean people or government or whatever. It means language. So in modern Church Slavonic, you would never see this see this form because it would use this yeah. But in this text, it happens because again, this is a period of pure inconsistencies, and he basically decided to use whatever he wanted. So языцы разные, so different languages in странах, languages or countries, говорите, to speak. So different languages are spoken or you'll be able to speak different languages in different countries, which is what we're doing right now, right? Basically. I don't think he thought of that when he wrote this. But okay, maybe he did. Кто знает. So, держати язик от злобные страсти. And again, this is z, right? But this wasn't, they didn't read this like z. This was just a z. So, держати язык от злобные страсти. So, to hold your tongue from, so this is the beautiful omega with a t, твердо at the top. So, from злобные meaning sinful, страсти, obsessions. So basically, this says, keep quiet. Don't say anything stupid. That's what it comes down to. Яблоко, яйцо, в требу добро ясти. Apple and the egg, in or whenever needed, it's good to eat, right? Добро, in this form, you don't encounter it in modern Russian. You have words like, set phrases like добро пожаловать, welcome, but dobro or добро as in good isn't really used like that in modern Russian anymore. Ясти, this is actually a yat. When a yat was the first letter of a word, in a word, it was written like this. So this means to eat. So it's good to eat, or whenever needed, it's good to eat the apple and the egg. Ястреб воздухом, ась водою ходит. So this is interesting. Ястреб, so that's hawk, right? Воздухом. So this is the instrumental case. And in Russian, just like in Ultra Slavonic and a lot of different languages, the instrumental case is used whenever you're accompanied by someone or if you use something to do something else. So this part of the sentence literally means hawk with air. And you might be like, wait, how does that work? Right? Hawk with air. Like there's nothing else. It's not travels, does, just hawk with air. This is actually a very Slavic construction. Ястреб воздухом. So this is the instrumentale, so the instrumental case. And that's because Russian has two different ways to express that you're doing something with someone or through something. That is with the adjective or the word na, meaning on, or with the instrumental case. So if I want to say I'm going by car, I'm traveling by car, in Russian that would be ехать на машине, right? But there's a different way of saying that. That would be ехать машиной. So I avoid using na, but I will use the instrumental case instead. And ехать машиной is pretty archaic in modern Russian. In other Slavic languages, like Croatian, this is the only accepted form. For example, if I want to say, I travel by train, in Croatian, idem vlakom. Vlak, which is train, vlakom, so I'm going with the train. I'm not saying I'm going on the train or I'm in the train or something like that. But in modern Russian, this form is usually avoided. Not in all cases, though. So in another example, if I wanted to use something like train, I could say something like ехать на поезде, right? So on the train. But there's a different form, which is kind of archaic, which is ехать поездом, which means I'm going with the train. Иди ты лесом. Perfect, Sergey, exactly. And Van Dog gave me another example, which I want to share with you guys, and that's идти дворами, which means walking through yards or courtyards, right? Between these apartment blocks, you have this space where you can play, usually kids play. But it actually says you're walking with these yards, but you're not. So it's a typical Slavic construction. So this basically says a hawk is traveling by air or going through the air, with the air, right? Язь водою ходит. So this is the archaic form of the instrumental. Водой would be the modern Russian form. So this would be something like Id, which is this fish, right? Travels by water, through the water. Next one. Ящурки в дому, да никто же плодит. So ящурки. So those are the reptiles, right? The different small animals. In this case, that would be lizards. В дому, so in your house, where you live. Да, South Slavic particle. Никто, no one. Же, intensifying particle. Плодит. So don't let lizards procreate spawn, produce in your house because it's filthy, right? So don't let them in. That's basically what it says. Ubo pishai ya. So uba, so this is an Old Church Slavonic and Modern Church Slavonic form, which means itak, поэтому, something like therefore or so. Pishai, so this is the imperative form of pisать, archaic form. So therefore write them. Again, this is them. Всяк верен скажися. So that everyone, верен, appear, faithful. So верен means faithful. Скажися probably means something like appear. Write them so that everyone will appear faithful. Faithful in probably means something like written the correct way, right? Remove the lizard spawner, please. That makes sense. That makes sense. We can see titlo right here. Человек здесь сущ, рая не лишися. So this is titlo, right, meaning some kind of sacred, saintly characteristics, because God was created by him, or man was created by God, as these old East Slavic peoples believed. Zdje meaning right here. Sushch, this is an archaic form of быть. So this would be the present active imperfective participle. So something like man who is here reading this or writing this. Raya, so heaven. Don't lishisia, don't deprive yourself of heaven. So don't do bad things so that you don't end up in heaven, right? Человек здесь сущ, man who is here, maybe reading this. Raya не лишися, don't deprive yourself of heaven. So when we read all of this, let's go over it once more. Кто отзовется я в каковом деле? И письмя зревья познают все смеле. Язык уд в слово создан носити, языцы разны в странах говорити. Держати язык от злобные страсти, яблоко, яйцо в требу добро ясти. Ястреб воздухом, ясь водою ходит, ящурки в дому, да никто же плодит. Убо пишай я всяк верен, скажися, человек здесь сущ, рая не лишися. And the last letter, guys. Let me just grab some water. Готовы, да? Давайте. Last letter. This is going to be a lot of theology, because this is a Greek letter that was adopted into Old Church Slavonic. And the name of this letter was Xi. And it was abolished. Xi, my любимый. Отлично. So the letter Xi was adopted into Old Church Slavonic directly from Greek and was abolished in 1708. So when Peter came to power at the end of the 17th century, he started reforming the alphabet, and eventually it got reformed in 1708. And one of the letters that he removed was the letter Xi. And it actually did have a numeric value, because in the Greek alphabet, it had a numeric value, which meant that when it was translated to Cyrillic, it had a numerical value as well. So in Cyrillic, the numerical value was 60. So as I said, the Xi comes from Greek, but interestingly enough, it was flipped. This is why I made that joke almost an hour ago. That's because for some reason they liked flipping things, flipping tables. One of them was this letter. So the Slavic form goes like this, while the Greek form is the other way around. It's literally mirrored. It's flipped for some reason. I don't know why. In Old Church Slavonic, it was occasionally, not always, but occasionally used to write ks. So the consonant cluster ks, which didn't exist in native Slavic words, was written with this letter. And all of these words that contained this letter were obviously Greek because Slavic didn't contain them, so they had to come from somewhere that was Greek. So words like xenodoch, which meant stranger, xylagog, meaning aloe, a tree, something like xiropotam, meaning dry river or stream. It's also a name of a different monastery. All of these names were written with this x letter, and that was because it was seen as a holy letter. A lot of important words, Greek words, were written with this x, right? Why does the xi have a hachek on it, Captain? That's a good question. I don't know. I really don't know. I know that in the Greek, the original Greek, there was I, right? So it was written with a iota. So I thought maybe this was Ižica, right? Andro, now think about it, I can't find any native. Dako nas to uopće ne koristi. So this x sound, it doesn't exist in native Slavic words, or existed in native Slavic words, right? So I thought this was Ižica, maybe Ižica on top of x, but there's no Ižica in the original Greek name, right? So yeah, it was specifically and only used in Greek words and Greek names. So you'll encounter it a lot in Greek names. And then Greek names that were borrowed, or well, Russian names that were borrowed from the Greeks were obviously written with x as well. And we're going to see examples of that right now. So we can see the different forms, right? X, so there's Latin, capital form, Greek form, and the different, basically, different forms. So next part is quite a lot of theology, and I'm not certain about some of these people, but we're going to cover it anyway because it's very interesting. So the first drawing is Ksenia, and I think this is Ksenia the Righteous of Rome. In Russian, her name would be Ksenia Milaska, and she was a saint of the 5th century, or in the 5th century, and she's honored by the Orthodox Church. Her original name wasn't Ksenia because it's a Greek name, right? But she was born as Eusebia, and she was the daughter of a wealthy senator in Rome. But she eventually decided to flee Rome because her father arranged a marriage with some dude, and she didn't like that, so she fled to Greece, modern-day Turkey. It's a city called Mylassa, and from there she actually fled to an island. And on that island, she received a different name, and she received the name Ksenia, meaning foreigner. So in old ancient Greek, you had Xenos, which meant foreigner, right? So she received that name because she was seen as a foreign person. She wasn't one of the Greeks, right? And eventually she collected some money, and she decided to build or to buy a plot of land and to build a church dedicated to a specific saint, which is Saint Stephen, who is seen as the first martyr of Christianity. And there's a quote about her that she lived an incredibly peaceful life, and that she helped everyone. For the destitute, she was a benefactress. For the grief-stricken, she was a comforter. For sinners, a guide to repentance. And she possessed a deep humility, accounting herself the worst and most sinful of all. She's still venerated in the Orthodox Church, and her feast day, right? So she's celebrated on January the 24th. I think that's her. I couldn't find any other holy or Saint Ksenias, so I'm pretty sure it's her. But the next one, also an interesting one. Let's see. Warhammer 40k flashbacks. Does the name also have any connection to ancient Greek concept of Ksenia? That's a great question. I don't know. I really don't know. But that's a great question. Maybe someone knows. Who is Xenophon? He actually is a saint. And Xenophon is the next one. So Xenophon is Xenophon of Robejka. And in Russian that would be Xenofont Robejski. And he was a Russian Orthodox monk in the late 14th century who was later declared a saint. And the interesting thing is that his past life is incredibly unknown and is clouded in mystery and inaccuracies because his original Życie, so his biography, was lost, and it was only recreated in the 17th century. But this 17th century contained a ton of mistakes, like a ton. And they even confused this Xenophon with a different Xenophon from who lived 200 years prior. So even in his biography, or the reconstructed biography written in the 18th century, they were making mistakes because they didn't really know, like they even messed up who he was. They even talked about a different guy, like a completely different guy with the same name though. And eventually in the 19th century, this was corrected. And he actually founded a very important monastery, which is called Nikolskaya Heritage, which is on the banks of the Robejka River, which is a river close to Novgorod. So he's a saint as well. How do we know that he's a saint? Well, you can see this drawing, right? Nimbus is what they call it in Latin, and that's basically to indicate sainthood. Right? Alexander. This one is difficult, guys, because it can be three different people. But let's cover all three. So the first one is Alexander of Rome, which is an early Christian martyr who died at the end of the 3rd century AD. He was originally like a Roman soldier, and then Marcus Hercules, which was a Roman emperor, basically told him that he should sacrifice something at the temple of Jupiter, and this Sigma male said no. So he rejected the offer. Or it wasn't even an offer, but he rejected what the emperor said, and he was killed, or he was removed. And he's celebrated in both the Orthodox and Orthodox and Catholic churches. He's celebrated on the 13th of May in the Catholic Church and the 26th of May in the Orthodox churches. Nimbus is a cognate to Slavic nebo. I didn't know that. No way. Oh, как интересно. Отлично. Second option, Alexander of Jerusalem. And he was a 3rd century bishop who was also venerated as a martyr and saint by most Christian churches. I'm not sure if he's venerated by the Oriental Church, Christian church, but maybe. Anyway, he was a bishop, and he was eventually persecuted and suffered a lot of bad things, but he survived all of them. And according to some stories I read, eventually when he was thrown in front of the wild beasts, they licked his feet. I don't know if that's the truth, but that's what the story says. And he's celebrated on the 18th of March in the Catholic Church and the 16th of May in the Orthodox Church. Now, the most probable option, that's the one I think that it's Alexander Swirsky, and he was a 15th century Eastern Orthodox saint, monk, and who, let me read this in ancient Greek. Hegumenos of the Russian Orthodox Church. And he was born in a peasant family in the Novgorod Republic. So this was before modern Russia was formed, right? Before the empire was formed, Novgorod used to be an incredibly powerful merchant republic for all those that played EU4 or CK2. And at quite an early age, at the age of 19, he left home for a very big monastery known as VIII Monastery, and he decided to become a monk. And he became known for a lot of different things, including a very righteous life, contemplative miracles. And one of these miracles was that, according to stories, of course, that the Trinity appeared. So not only the Virgin Mary and the Holy Child, so Jesus Christ, but also the Trinity itself, so the Holy Spirit. And he has two different feast days, which is April the 17th and August the 30th. So he's not venerated in the Catholic Church because this is after the Great Schism, right, of 1053. Nimbus means cloud, nebula, of course. Igumen, короче. Exactly, igumen. It doesn't work in CK2. Or CK3. Next one. The saint. Two options. First would be Alexius of Rome, which is a 4th century monk who lived in anonymity. So this guy is also crowded in or shrouded in mystery, basically. And he was known for his dedication in Christ. Why the mystery? Well, that's because there are two completely different stories about his life. The first one is a Syriac story and the second one is a Greek story. And because of this, he kind of gained a legendary status, which is also the reason why he was actually removed, or his feast day was removed by the Roman Catholic Church from the calendar back in 1969. Nice. Because before that, he was actually venerated on the 17th of July. So he was removed from the calendar, the Roman Catholic calendar. But he's still venerated in the Eastern Orthodox Church, and he's venerated on the 17th of March. I'm in a German restaurant, I'm cutting out. Oh, don't worry, man. It was nice to have you. And the second option, Saint Alexius, so Alexei in Russian. I think that's him. I think that's the most probable option. He was an early 14th century metropolitan of Kiev and all of Russia, right? Because the center of Orthodoxy of the East was Kiev. That's where everything started for the Eastern Slavs, all of Russia. So he took his monastic vows in a monastery of Moscow in 1313, at which time he was given a religious name Alexius. Listen to this. So his original name wasn't Alexei, right? Wasn't Alexius. But before that, he was known as Eleftherios. Eleftherios. What an awesome name. So Eleftherios. And eventually, he became incredibly famous for a lot of different miracles. And he was so famous that during this period, you had the Tatars, right? So the horde that invaded, and all of Russia, all these different principalities had to pay tribute to the Khan. And he became so famous that the Khan of the Golden Horde actually asked him to move to the capital of the Golden Horde back then to cure his mother, Taidula Khatun, of blindness. And he succeeded. This mad guy succeeded. And because of this success, that's basically what the story says, the Tatars didn't invade afterwards. So there was a plan to invade the Russian lands, but because he saved the mother of the Khan, he eventually stopped this. That's what the story says. And he's incredibly famous in Russia, and he has 3 different feast days for different parts of his life. So February the 12th, May 20th, and October 5th. And he's actually seen as one of the patron saints of Moscow. So if you go to Moscow, sometimes you can read about him. I actually remember reading something about him, but I didn't know it was him back when I was in Moscow. So, last person, he has this nimbus, right? But it turns out that he's not a saint. And we're not sure if he even existed. So who's this guy? This is Xanth Philosoph. Xanthos in Russian, or in Greek, the philosopher. And this probably refers to Xanthus, which is who was a Greek philosopher who lived in the 7th century before Christ. And he was the master of a specific slave called Aesop, which is a very famous Greek storyteller credited with creating and telling a number of fables. So in Greek, if you studied Greek, you might have heard of this guy. Well, he was the master of him. We don't know a lot about him, but Why is he marked as a saint? Why does he have this nimbus? Great question. Van Dog actually told me that there are several other cases in which certain people received this nimbus even though they weren't saints. So, yeah. Alexei, because he's always depicted in a style of clothes. Well, that might be, you might be right. I'm not that familiar with Syrian clothes, but that would make sense, right? So this guy is probably just a philosopher, a Greek philosopher from the 7th century BC. Interestingly, his name is also not mentioned in the text as one of the saints. So that might be one of the indications that it's actually not a saint. I asked several people, I tried finding, I searched in Koine Greek, in Church Slavonic, in Old East Slavic, I couldn't find anything about this guy. So it's probably the Greek philosopher. Interestingly, philosopher, philosoph, in Old Church Slavonic meant two different things. One was philosopher, second was scientist. So any scientist was a philosopher. I need to go. I'll watch the end of the stream later. It was nice to have you, man. See ya. Thank you for coming. So let's move on to the text, the last part. Aesop is still... I didn't hear about him, so I've never heard about this guy. But it turns out he's quite famous, yeah. So, se Elino-Griecka ksi pisma slavenom. Just a sec. So, Selino-Griecka ksi pisma slavenom. This literally means from Helleno-Greek, which means Greek, right? So this actually uses the original Greek spelling. So in Greek, this would be written like e, l, heta, n, o, which basically is copied, right? So e, l, double L's with e, but even though in Greek this would be heta, n, o. So in Helleno-Greek, ksi pisma slavenom. So this actually refers to the second sentence that we're going to cover, and it means ksi is part of the Slavic orthography or Slavic script. V pravopisanstwie, so in the orthography, to o niech imenom. So that are their names. To that o niech would be there, which comes from Old Church Slavonic, o niecha, which is not used in modern Russian anymore. Imenom, so name, instrumental case. And now we go on to the different names. Xenofont sviate. So this is a titlo, right? Which means that it's a sacred word. So Xenofont, the holy, Xenia sviataya. So Xenia, the holy, I Alexi sviat. So and Alexius, the holy. Ksi v slogi vmieszczaya, which means ksi in syllables contained, which means that in all of these words there's a ksi, right? Kind of self-explanatory, this one. So ksi is located in all of these words. Let me just see. Greek squared. In Russia we have a phrase, Aesop of Yazik. Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting. Moving on. This would be Juni pisati ksi nie otricajся. Juni meaning young one. In this case, this would be in the vocative case. Pisati, write. So to write, ksi, which is the name of the letter, not otricajся. Don't deny. So don't deny writing the ksi. Write it whenever it's needed. V pamięciach святых в небо оправляйся. So in the memory, v in pamięciach, in the memory of the saints, titlo, which means holy word, v небо, in the sky or in heaven, управляйся, meaning govern, right? In the memory of the saints, in heaven or in the sky, you will govern. За не. This is also not used in modern Russian. За не comes from Old Church Slavonic, meaning because of therefore. So therefore, in życie, in life, свято ты устроен. За не в житие свято ты устроен. So, therefore, in life, holy, свято, ты, you are established. Therefore, in life, you're established as a holy person, right? Or in the sky or in heaven. Ходи разумно, в мудрости узброен. So, ходи, to go or go. Разумно means reasonably or wisely. В мудрости, meaning in wisdom, узброен. So, узброен probably means armed. And Ukrainian still has a word for this. Zbroya, meaning weapon. They also have оружие, but it's kind of archaic. So this probably means ходи, so go reasonably or wisely in wisdom, or be armed in wisdom through life. Сущо надежды век не отпадеши. So really, сущо probably means суще, meaning действительно. So really, надежды, which means hope, в век, forever, or in centuries, not отпадеши. So you will never lose hope forever. Armored, not armed. That could be possible too. Armored in wisdom, right? Even though the construction armed with wisdom is possible as well. Yo, привет. So then you have еще и других к Богу приведеши. So Богу титло, right? Sacred word. Еще, еще in modern Russian. So also and others to God you will bring. Again, a lot of theology. So really you won't lose hope ever. Веки не отпадеши. So it won't fall, it won't disappear. Еще и других к Богу приведеши. So when we read this from the top, this would be с элино-грецка кси письма славеном в правописанстве то о них именом. Ксенофонт святый, Ксения святая, и Алексий святый, кси в слоги вмещая. Юни писаты, кси не отрицайся, в памятях святых в небо управляйся. За не в житие свято ты устроен, ходи разумно в мудрости узброен. Сущо надежды век не отпадеши, еще и других к Богу приведеши. There we go. That's it, guys. That's the 3 letters of today. Буква Ю, буква Я, буква Кси. Are there any questions about any of the letters or any of the things that we covered? If there are, and you cannot think of them right now, please leave a comment on any of the videos. Just feel free to, or if you want to correct something I said, feel free to do so. I'm not a linguist. But there's a lot of interesting topics, reoccurring topics, right? So a lot of theology, a lot of advice when it comes to living a life in a good way, prosperous way, or as God intended in this Bukvár, right? Obviously, it's filled with religious motives. So, Ksi, Ya, Iu. Next stream is going to be the last one. And we're going to cover psa, psi, fita, or theta, which didn't exist in Greek, or Boże, in the sound didn't exist in Slavic. And the last one would be ižica, which is one of my favorite letters. Let's see. There we go, guys. If there are no more questions, I'm not ready for this to end. actually looked for a lot of different manuscripts I can cover. There's a lot of stuff I still want to cover, so don't worry. So next week is going to be the last stream covering this, and then we're going to move on to a different topic, or at least a different manuscript. So don't worry, there's going to be more of them. So before I leave, there's a few people I want to thank. I want to thank Van Dog for helping me out with these translations. I want to thank Julius and Leonidas for helping me out with the Greek translations. They were extremely helpful. Thank you so much. I want to thank people in my Discord server for helping me with some Russian translations. And a special thanks to my patrons for helping me make all of this possible and allowing me to invest a lot of time into making this, because a stream like this takes a lot of hours of preparation. So special thanks to Felix, Aldama, Valentin, Grigory, Grisha, Dvier, Federacia, Yasha, and Pixelation. Thank you so much for helping me out. If you don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. Exactly. So if you guys want to join the Discord server, you can. There's a link on the Patreon. We basically we basically talk about topics like this, manuscripts like 24/7. So if you're interested in that stuff, please feel free to check out the Patreon. Again, thank you all so much for attending like it's a lecture, right? Thank you so much for coming. I enjoyed it. I love doing this. So thank you again. Спасибо вам большое. I'm proud of you guys. И увидимся. Давайте. Пока. Бог.